I want to introduce Eric Woodward. We're going to be talking about investing trends in digital identity, movers and shakers in 2021. Eric is now been a senior advisory board member for OWI for the past several months, but we've been working together very closely over the past year. Welcome to the digital stage, Eric, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Travis. Great to see you again, and excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. You and I have spent probably way too much time together over the past, 9 to 12 months at this point. Lots of late nights, and I'm sure we're going to talk about those here with a lot of the great deals that we were able to work on together. But just real quick for everybody here, tell us about yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, well, just by way of background, most recently I spent the last 10 years at a bank-owned consortium known as Early Warning. It's a fraud and risk prevention company that was focused around identity, authentication, and payments risk. And then over time, with the data we gathered and with the technology we were able to enable, we were able to deliver Zelle, which hopefully everyone's familiar with and big users of, which is the most recent person-to-person payment network in the U.S. and now is roughly the size of PayPal in terms of P2P transactions. For myself, I had a role that oversaw strategy, M&A, corporate development, and then recently ran product for a significant portion of the risk business and portfolio of companies that I've been helping, everything from investing to advising to getting my hands dirty in some of the operational roles. And that's been a lot of fun as well. And of course, the place that I've spent the most amount of my time has been with the team at One World Identity, as you guys just continue to circle around so much of the space that everybody is interested in, especially that identity, access management, the fraud, the risk pieces. And so that's been a lot of fun where we've been able to bring a number of private equity relationships, investment banking relationships, and obviously a significant amount of companies who are looking for guidance. So that's been the most exciting part of the last year.
Well, I'll pay you later for saying that. It's very nice of you to say that's the most exciting part. I tend to agree. I think that going into 2020, we kind of knew digital identity was having its Cambrian moment, if you will. It was kind of coming to its own. People were starting to gel together. We just talking with Cameron here previously, on the last session, talking about how the landscape has really started to be more collaborative in nature as you start to see markets become more solution segments working together to create opportunities and around use cases and opening up new and different ways to use identity technology, right? So it has been quite exciting. But I'm sure we're going to talk about your EWS experience as well as the handful of companies that you've been working with over the past year. But just really quickly, since this is an investment-focused piece of this forum here today, over the half dozen or more deals that you and I got to check out the past, 9 months, anything notable, anything surprising for you during this adventure?
Look, I think the most surprising thing is just the speed with which this particular sector has really taken off. Shouldn't be surprising given that as soon as COVID hit, shelter in place became a thing. You literally couldn't go down to the bank to open up an account, much less get access to your money. Things had to happen online. And so, of course, we saw a tremendous pop in all of these different online providers of services, not the least of which guys like Zoom, how we're interacting and connecting today. But clearly, at the end of that communication, you need to figure out who you're talking to, who you're trying to send money to, who you're receiving information from. And so this concept of having a strong digital identity in a virtual world, which we had been preaching for the better part of the last 10 years, has now just become a de facto standard and requirement. And so I think that was probably the most shocking, as I thought I'd be able to take a year off, not go on the beach, hang out with family, and not miss a beat. And of course, almost immediately things just started exploding in a good way.
Yeah, yeah, in a good way. It's been kind of wild to see how many companies immediately go, digital identity is pretty core to our business. How do we solve this? And you just touched on something. which I thought was kind of unique, and maybe would love your perspective on this, is we started seeing this emergence of the consumer identity journey and a lot of the deals that we worked on, right? It was either you were at the beginning of the consumer journey, either maybe that's a communications part of it, maybe you're in the later stages part of the consumer journey with the account opening component, or even later on where you're talking about transaction monitoring and regular ongoing engagement with the customers. But what I saw was pretty interesting across the board was, even whether it was private equity or a strategic enterprise or a startup or a big company just trying to get bigger, they kind of have a pretty similar vision around this consumer journey. Would love your thoughts on the consumer journey and where you think this market's kind of taking it.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting. Obviously, everyone tends to play their own book in this space. So if you're really good at dot capture, a high identity assurance is the requirement, and that don't worry about any friction that comes with it. If your focus is on network authentication, I know information about the telephone, then of course a low friction experience is the key to the journey. I think what we've seen and what we've really learned in all of these interactions is that there is no one right answer in consumers' minds. A lot of it depends upon what the actual interaction is that they're trying to do. Of course, as little friction as possible is always desired, but at the same time, the requirements around both privacy and security are only going to continue to get stronger. And so I like the different angles that companies are taking, but I think the ones that are ultimately winning are the ones that are creating great user experiences while still delivering on the promise of security.
And yeah, I mean, absolutely. In terms of kind of how to do that, you and I think you've been preaching this, for as long as I can remember, talking about the importance of the device and the person and the experience. Just for the sake of our audience, would love for you to kind of expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, so for sure. And I think maybe we'd add a new dimension in today, which is biometrics as well. But clearly, trying to understand the consumer wherever it is, in whatever channel they're interacting with you, is the critical part. And so, of course, before it was show up with your driver's license, then it was get online with the username and password. Both of those have issues, of course, and aren't necessarily the best way to do things. So what we found is that the devices themselves are critical parts of the journey that can really add value to understanding a consumer. It's rare that you hand someone your phone. If you do, it's for a few minutes and then you get it back. And so being able to have that one-to-one relationship, at least with their device, and you can tie or bind those devices to so many different channels. At an ATM, you can QR code, calling into the call center, you can send them an OTP, getting onto online banking, and the software itself has intelligence that understands who it is that they're interacting with. So I think when you layer in the information around the device, along with additional information around the person themselves, all the different things related to PII, personally identifying information, could be email addresses, it could be physical addresses, could be phone numbers, as well as, if you can get to it, information around accounts and transactions. You can have an incredibly strong perspective of the individual and even how they behave and how they interact over time. What we've now seen is that if you can attach to that additional information around biometrics, and of course the best is the actual physical of the person, but when that's not available, or you don't want to manage the requirements that come along with storing that type of physical biometric, then what we've now seen is pretty hot in the space is behavioral biometrics, and the idea of who's the person holding it, how tall are they, how hard are they tapping on the phone, how many times do they hit the P when they mean to hit the O. And I think when you can combine that intelligence together, again, for most transactions out there, that's going to be more than enough information to, say, sell the TV and let it go out the door.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of reminds me of an experience back in the Google days where, it's just wild to see how far behavioral biometrics has come, because we actually were, we were working on a lot of this with the Android device. I'm not going to say which Android device, but working on a lot of this, trying to test things out. And that thing was burning a hole in my pocket and all of our testers' pockets as we'd walk around the building trying to kind of test things out, trying to figure this thing out. We were just burning the battery down, and just to kind of see the advancements in sensors and how we're actually connecting that with data science and trying to make sense of people's movements and, like you said, behavioral biometrics for actual use, right? So going from a lab quite literally 5 years ago in Google, and I know Google is not the one leading this. There's plenty of companies doing that. Going from that 5 years ago to now, we're talking about it as this is a major trend. And if you're an investor in this space, if you're a startup in the space, hey, you gotta kind of take this stuff seriously now. Like, this is actually a real modality that people are putting money behind, that people are moving out of just the proof of concept phase and into real deployment and implementation for high value use cases such as banking and other financial services.
Yeah, I think you make a great point about all of the sensors, but not only are the sensors improved on the device that we use every day, but we've added new devices. So of course, most of us have some form of a wearable, which in and of itself tracks and creates a whole bunch of unique information, right? My phone didn't have a heartbeat tracker. Of course, my watch does. And that is probably, unique to me. And certainly when you combine it with my phone number, you combine it with other intelligence on the phone, is certainly unique to me. And then you think about what's coming down the pipe, probably glasses next, which we're both wearing, right? Which will create some additional intelligence. And I just think that the companies that figure out how to manage, whether it's a combination of the Internet of Things and all the devices that are talking to you inside your home or connected to you inside your home, or it's the wearable segment, or it's everything tied to your phone. There's so much data out there that's going to be really the next big challenge, is how to manage all that data to make sense of things when they conflict.
Yeah. We just split apart consent management and and master data management on our landscape. I know we just kind of talked about that, but it's simply because of this. It's such a big component of the future of pretty much the entire space. Is how are we going to manage this data? How are the consumers, how are the users going to have control over this? Are they going to have control over this, right? I mean, obviously that's a jurisdictional question at this point still. But I think one of the things that we are, at least that I took away from this year, and again, would love for you to dig in on, is throughout all the several deals that you and I did, some of those obviously turned into to actually closing, which, for the folks on the call, what that feeling's like if, you work on those and they actually go through. But the consumer was a major component for all the buy sides. I mean, it was, what is the consumer journey, and putting the consumer into the actual driver's seat when it came down to product management. Do you think that's a trend that we're going to continue to see going forward? Or do you think that's just a today trend?
No, I think it's critical. I think what's been exposed by the situation where you've got to interact in a virtual world is that there's a whole bunch of consumers that are being left behind in the old traditional experiences. I talked to one large financial institution where they said their pull-through rate was between 40 and 50%. And what that means is, of the people who want to open up a new account in a virtual journey, this is in their online channel, less than half actually get through to opening that account without having to be forced to go down to a branch, especially a branch that may not be open, but certainly if they are open, are only open traditional banking hours. And so you think about, in today's day and age, it's 2021, and your virtual channel pull-through rate is less than half, you've got problems, right? You're not focused on what the consumers need and want. And we're seeing that manifest itself, of course, by these neobanks, which are adding tens of millions of consumers, right? Back when it was tens of thousands, nobody cared. At 100,000, maybe somebody took notice. But now, the banks themselves are trying to launch their own versions of neobanks. Unfortunately, not with much success to date, as we've seen a number of those open and close rather rapidly and spectacularly. But what's come out of the next generation of those is a lot of focus on the consumer experience, the ability to get those accounts open, the ability to connect them to extra experiences. Initially, it was just about trying to be able to get advancements on your lending, on your payday employment. And now it's about so much more. What can I do? Can I make investments with this money? can I connect it to give to charities that I care about? Just so many different services tied to that consumer experience. And you're literally seeing entire banks, neobanks start up focused on a very segmented consumer experience. You'd never see that from a traditional bank, at least not right now. So I think, yeah, the consumer will lead the way on a lot of these new investments. And we're seeing, you and I were talking about before we got online here, close to $30 billion was spent in the last year on the 3,000 companies that we track in this identity landscape at One World Identity. I mean, $30 billion, I don't think either of us could have fathomed that just a couple of years ago. And now we're starting to wondering what's going to look like in 2021 and 2022. How quickly will that number double? I don't think it's going to take that long.
It is really, and you bring up that number, $30 billion. It's unbelievable when we pulled all those numbers together, and obviously in preparation for this session, we literally were like, what the hell? Like, oh my goodness, like that is a tremendous amount of capital being poured into what some would consider a niche space. It's kind of hard to argue that it's not a niche space, but then you look at those numbers and you go like, no, this is actually a space that's powering pretty much everything that we're doing in our daily lives, and going to probably continue to happen that way for quite some time. And it kind of leads me to a bit of the COVID impact, right? And we mentioned 2020. I think there's some really big trends that I want to dig in with you. For one, travel. To e-commerce, right? I think these are the two big ones that kind of have totally different experiences, but want to get your thoughts on the impact that COVID has had, the rapid digital transformation, the big money coming in, of course, definitely helps that. But what is your general thoughts on COVID, travel, and e-commerce as markets over the past year?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, most of us traveled significantly less in 2020 than we did in any previous year for a very long time. To some extent, that was very nice. To the other extent, of course, it changed the way that we interacted with people. And I just saw, one of my good friends from the banking system had posted online saying he may have to travel again soon. It was sort of asking everyone, have they traveled in the last 12 months? Last time he had traveled was in February. What do you know about it? What can you tell me, right? And what was amazing is he's got, many followers, and a lot of people are posting about, well, I had one trip in June. I traveled in August, and that's it, right? Kind of people had one, maybe two trips last year for the most part. And it was the experience of, whether or not the plane was full, whether or not you had to wear a mask. And of course, this stuff wasn't standardized. I think what we're seeing now, and especially coming out of this new administration, is requirements that will be standardized across the industry. And I'm not just talking about wearing, PPE, protective equipment, right? That we're actually going to have to prove that we've been vaccinated when we go to certain countries, or we're going to have to prove that we had a negative test that was taken within the last 24 hours or 48 hours before we got on that plane, maybe even before we entered that airport. And so you're going to start to see a combination of this information where I have highly sensitive medical data. It's going to have its own kind of HIPAA requirements around privacy and storage of that data. And then I have a need to actually share that data with third parties. And then importantly, the third parties need to not just see that it was a negative test, but that it truly belonged to me, right? The traveler. And there's this concept in the travel community around a seamless traveler journey, right? And it really started with digital identity. It was really initially tied to the mobile device and has now expanded into biometrics. I think strangely, that got a bit of a stop in 2020 instead of an accelerant, because of course, all the travel industries were trying to figure out, how do we survive? Where do we cut costs? Where do we focus our energies? But now you're starting to see the spending come back in that. I think just saw American Airlines announced something, a partnership with one of the players in the space around how they expect to be able to share that information in a safe and secure manner with the consumer in control and the consent in control. But I think actually, what will come out of this is some great experiences going forward, where it won't be just about whether or not you've been vaccinated, whether or not you've had a negative COVID test, but actually you'll be able to carry, kind of an entire digital passport payment experience all embedded, inside of something that the consumer controls. And hopefully it's agnostic whether you're traveling with American or United or somewhere else entirely. So I expect to see a lot of changes in the industry. That goes the same for shared ride services, the hotel industry. It's really truly across the spectrum of how you travel.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of good points there, and it kind of it brings me back to I remember the exact moment when the notion of contact tracing was going to be a big part of this, and Philip Verley, senior product manager at Google, also one of our senior advisors here at OWI, he called me up and he's like, "Hey, watch it now, digital identity wallets, contact tracing. If you don't have contact tracing in your wallet, you're not going to be successful. The next 3 years are going to depend on it." I don't know where he stands on that now. That was months ago, but at the time he immediately called out and said, "Hey, companies like ID.me and Idemia and folks that are working on identity proofing stacks are going to see a lot of success this year." And I think as an events organizer, we actually did watch MGM go through this process, and they did actually use ID.me for kind of a version of contact tracing. And Blake, apologies if it's not contact tracing and you're watching this, but that's how they came to us. That's how MGM came out to OWI and said, "Hey, we're a safe place now. We have this ID.me partnership, and you guys can come through here." And so even as a vendor, even as a buyer of services for something like that, not just as a consumer going through an airport, it seemed pretty important as a selling point for me to have my business say, this is going to be a liability shift from my business, because I don't want to have my attendees get sick at this location. So I think it's going to probably impact quite a few things.
Yeah, and it makes a ton of sense, right? My wife and I talk about, where is the vacation going to be in 2021? And a lot of it depends upon, well, when are we talking about traveling? If you're going to go now, we'll go to Hawaii, because they're actually mandating everyone tests and test negative before they get on a plane, or they get on the plane and they're quarantined as soon as they land until they get that negative test. You contrast that with Mexico, and it's just a very different experience. And of course, one has higher friction up front, but you feel a lot better about the experience on the back end. And so, being able to do that, and you can imagine, I know you talked about ID.me and Idemia, you can imagine the guys at Clear, where they're already doing a biometric authentication to, scoot you through the airport faster, could easily enable some sort of COVID testing at the stations. They've got all the rapid testing ones, which are 15 minutes. You could literally have that negative assurance from the moment that you get to border control before you ever get to the gates. That's a great customer experience that can be enabled. And of course, if it can pop up in your device where you can present it anonymously but tied to you, so much the better. So I think lots of transformation coming in that space this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And, before this session, not to keep going back to our new landscape, but we do kind of call out this, the content moderation piece. And, obviously age verification has been on the tip of a lot of people's tongues recently, especially with, things like the Jewel case coming up with North Carolina. We have additional regulations coming out of Europe around age verification around minors, making sure that they're not being exposed to certain content online. So right now, people are trying to figure out this seamless experience with low friction, and it seems like kind of a few external forces are coming together at the same time to create what I expect to be a pretty robust digital identity wallet ecosystem over the next year or two. Not to go away from this, because it's really important and probably one of the bigger trends that we're going to see this next year, but e-commerce, massive year, huge impact. You and I had some experience looking at several companies and working on some buy-side work over the past year for strategics acquiring into the e-commerce fraud and risk space. What are your thoughts? Do you think this trend is going to continue going forward for e-commerce? What are you thinking?
Yeah, well, look, the big question is, does anybody shop anywhere that's not Amazon? And if they do, can they get an Amazon-like experience everywhere else they shop? And if you think about there's so many virtues of Amazon, what they've been able to build in their ecosystem all the way through their supply chain. But one of the most important is that you can search on their site, find anything, and with the click of a button, either add it to your cart or have it shipped to your home. In our case, right, they literally deliver it inside the garage. So how does another company compete with that when they've got the new widget to sell, or they're the new retail channel that wants to sell those widgets? And that's the channel, right? And it goes back to that great user experience and that seamless, in this case, retail journey of how do I verify who I am so I can pay for something immediately, or importantly, embedding solutions where I don't actually have to pay immediately. I can pay later, but the retailer doesn't have to take the risk on that. And I think there's a lot of really cool technologies that are coming that are enabling everything from buy now, pay later to warranties after the fact, right? I've already bought it and brought it home. And by the way, at a better price and better terms than I would have gotten with the retailer in the first place. And so you're seeing a lot of these fintech experiences that will build around retailers and the retailer journey. And of course, we worked on very closely with the Equifax team on their acquisition of Count. That was a great transaction to help Equifax round out all of its data sets, its knowledge, its capabilities, but obviously close that last mile down to the retailers to be able to provide them intelligence at the point of sale or at the transaction level. And you're going to see more and more of that happening in a virtual channel, where the need to understand the consumer, the potential for chargeback, the potential for risk on those transactions be at the forefront of your decision-making process. So I think it is going to be a pitched battle. You're going to see many different retailers trying to compete, but the Amazon behemoth is a juggernaut, to state the obvious.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of brings us back full circle to the beginning of this chat when we're talking about kind of the notion of the phone, tying it to the person, tying it to the experience, tying it to the biometrics, and just in like you said, taking it all the way up front to the transaction. So you're giving somebody an online experience that is really tailored to them at that point. And, you can mitigate the right risks. You can use chargeback. You can do liability shift, you name it. Seems like a pretty big space, lots of investments and lots of acquisitions likely to occur over the next 6 to 12 months is what I would suggest. Huh?
Yeah, I think you're going to continue to see lots of exciting efforts afoot. I know we're still talking to a number of companies that are just ginning up their investment cycles now, of course, on the backs of lots of great valuations that came over the last 6-9 months. And based upon what we see coming out in the near future, it's just going to continue to get more and more exciting, right? More and more players getting well funded to think through their strategic plans going forward. So I don't see any difference in that over the near future.
No slowing down. All right. Well, with that, I know we got to move to the Q&A session here. So let's just jump right into. We got about a couple minutes, so probably time for about 2 questions here, Eric. So the first one here is about. Let me see here. Which one do I like the most? All right. All right. So I actually like this one a lot. One of the things that we do know about you is that you work with a lot of small companies. You work from, both early stage as well as some folks maybe later stage, but you have, a lot of experience working with startups. And so one of the questions here is, what do you look for when working with a startup company? And is this something that people can reach out to you about?
Yeah, I know. Look, I appreciate you asking. It's been a very fun last 12 months. You've seen, for those who follow me on LinkedIn, obviously I've continued to kind of add new and different companies that I'm doing advisory services for. And again, those take on a role of their own. My goal generally in speaking with companies is if there's something of value that I can do for them, and there's something of value to someone in my network that I can do for them, I just make the connection. I call it karma points, right? And I'm just trying to help these companies get to that next level, because I know at the end of the day, it's going to create much better consumer experiences. And I'm really interested in transforming the consumers' financial lives, as well as just lives in general in this digital identity space. So I've talked to, I don't know, not 3,000 companies, but maybe a subset, 300 of them, and have talked a lot about different ways that I can help them. I'd say for everyone that I agree to help, there's probably 3 or 4 more that I can't. I just don't feel like I can bring value to them, or it's just not the right fit. So what do I do to try and filter through all those? First and foremost, of course, I have just kind of my own company filter where I'm trying to figure out, do they have a chance at being successful, or can they be more successful than where they are today? And so how do I see them mapped against the space already? And then what do I see in that particular segment as the biggest potential? And I've tried to be as thoughtful as possible about looking companies in very specific segments. So working with a company that's focused on synthetic identity fraud, working with a company that's focused on high value assurance identity document capture, and how they deal with digital identity, working with a company that's focused on data aggregation, but not the aggregation of the data, the actual transaction intelligence that can come from it, and making it standardized so you can create value out of it. And so with each of those, once I get down to yes, the company has a great chance, is well positioned in a really interesting space, then it comes down, of course, to the management team, specifically the CEO. Do they have the right strategy and vision, or can I help them position that? And do they have great legs to actually drive this into the marketplace? Or again, can a couple of my connections help make that happen? And so it's been a lot of fun as these companies have fought through their different journeys. And the jury's still out. We've had a couple of big successes already, but a lot of excitement for 2021.
Absolutely. And just to kind of tag on to that, is there a best way to contact you? I know we have a lot of entrepreneurs on this call right now. What's the best way? Is it LinkedIn, or are you giving out your cell phone number? What's the...
Yeah, well, if they're really good in digital identity, they can find my cell phone number. It probably takes about 3 seconds of a Google search and maybe 6 cents, these days. But no, of course, LinkedIn, I think, is the best way, because it's a great way for me to see who they are, where they're connected from. In fact, one of the most recent companies I'm advising, the person, as they say, slipped into my DMs, right? I had responded to something online. He came in and had a perspective, and we started chatting, and his company's focused in the hyper personalization space for money management. And I just really like the concept. I like the focus. I like the attention. And so, they come from a lot of different sources. Most of them I tend to already know someone in the space connected to them, and they're making introductions at this point. So, but I'm happy to talk to anyone. And I think it's also helpful when you and I are talking to prospective buyers in the space, to be able to give them a comprehensive landscape mapping. We know we don't know everyone, but we try to.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes without saying, I mean, it's been a really great year working aside, with you on a handful of deals. I know we have a bunch going on right now as well. And to that point, if someone is watching this and they do want to connect with both Eric and I to talk about the landscape, and again, this extends past just the landscape that Cameron and I just went through, but if this is talking about kind of a market scan, or just want to kind of pick our brains, please do reach out. That is, we are nerds in the space, so happy to do that. But with that, Eric, I do believe I'm out of time, and I know we didn't get to all the questions. So if for the audience members, if you guys, if we didn't answer your question and it is urgent, reach out to Eric directly on LinkedIn, or you can reach us at events@oneworldidentity.com. But Eric, thank you so much for joining us on this session. Really appreciate your thoughts. And I'm sure we're going to have you back very soon to talk about all those big deals that you've been working on.
Sounds great. It's great to see you again, Travis. Appreciate the time, and look forward to the next session.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Eric.
Take care.